Hi again. The first time I heard Marilyn Nelson's poems, they were being sung by Issei Barnwell, an amazing composer and vocalist from the a cappella group Sweet Honey in the Rock. 2 summers ago, I met Issei at a writer's colony where she was working on a requiem based on Marilyn's book, Fortune's Bones. This collaboration between Issei and Marilyn led me to the poems on the page, the poems about a slave named Fortune, whose bones were saved after his death by his owner as a study guide for himself and his sons, a family of doctors. This real-life story, brimming with metaphor, is made all the more intense and gripping through Marilyn's poems. Fortune's Bones, by the way, is a children's book, which is probably why I wasn't as familiar with it as I was with her other work. But Marilyn's poetry for children and young adults is just as effective on her grown-up readers. She is a Renaissance woman whose work in several genres and community building is remarkable, generous, and inspiring. She is, for example, the director of Soul Mountain Retreat, opening her own home in Connecticut to other poets as a place to work. Marilyn Nelson graduated from the University of California, Davis, and holds postgraduate degrees from the University of Pennsylvania and the University of Minnesota. In addition to Fortune's Bones, her books are For the Body, Mama's Promises, The Home Place, Magnificat, The Fields of Praise, New and Selected Poems, Carver, A Life in Poems, and A Wreath for Emmett Till, a crown of heroic sonnets published last year, the 50th anniversary of Emmett Till's lynching. She also co-edited with Sheila Murphy Down the Dark Pine Green, a volume that celebrates the life of Leo Connellan. Her honors include 2 creative writing fellowships from the NEA, a fellowship from the Guggenheim Foundation, a Fulbright Teaching Fellowship, a Boston Globe Horn Book Award, a Newbery Honor Award, and a Coretta Scott King Honor Award. She is a professor emerita of the University of Connecticut Stores, an ex officio board member of the Connecticut Commission on Culture and Tourism, and the Poet Laureate of the state of Connecticut. It wasn't until after I read Marilyn's book, Fortune's Bones, that I realized the project was actually commissioned by a museum in Connecticut where Fortune's bones were eventually donated and kept on display. This made the work all the more breathtaking and important, that Marilyn was asked to help put Fortune to rest at last, and that she said yes. She was also asked to write about and pay tribute to the life of Emmett Till, and she said yes. Marilyn Nelson is a brave poet. Her work is political in the best sense of the word. It is an honor for me to meet her tonight, to hear her sing her own poems, and to introduce her to all of you. Please help me welcome Marilyn Nelson.
I first of all want to say how honored I am to be here as a part of this festival and to give a shout out to my workshop people. I really like you guys, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the conference. Miles, thank you for inviting me, and Tom, where are you? It's an honor to read on the same bill with you. I enjoyed your reading. Thank you. I've been talking about politics and audience in my workshop, and I've had the wonderful luck of finding a publisher who wanted to publish my books, which were not written for children. I don't write for children, but I have a publisher who is willing to publish my poems for a young adult audience, which means I have illustrated books coming out, and this is for me a political decision as well, because it means I'm reaching a future audience of poetry and helping to create an audience for future American poets. And I'm committed to this. It's been a great joy having my poems moved into this different category, this different world, even though a lot of people in the regular poetry audience don't know about my work because it's not put on the poetry shelves and it's not reviewed by the regular poetry press for the most part. It's been a good decision for me. I'm going to read only sonnets this evening because for the last couple of years I've become a formalist. I wasn't born a formalist. I was created and made a formalist. I've grown into it. And I'm going to read from 3 projects. The first two are new poems from two forthcoming books. One of them is a book which I've written in collaboration with Elizabeth Alexander. Because I'm Poet Laureate of Connecticut, I've been writing Connecticut stories, some Connecticut stories. That's been my laureate project, and Fortune's Bones was the first of those. And I'm going to read from two others. I'll be finished this year. It's a 5-year term. I've reached the end of it. I don't think I'm going to write any more Connecticut poems then. But Elizabeth and I each wrote a dozen sonnets about the girls who were students in a school which was started by a young woman named Prudence Crandall in 1833 in Canterbury, Connecticut. Prudence Crandall was asked by the town of Connecticut to open a school for girls, and she did. She opened a school for girls, and midway through the first year, a couple of African-American girls who were servants in homes in the village of Canterbury. Canterbury is a very small village. These two girls asked her whether they could sit in on some of the classes when they finished their own work. And Prudence Crandall allowed them to join the white girls in her classes. And the town of Canterbury and the state of Connecticut went ballistic. They made a law against teaching people of color who were not residents of the state. You'll hear it from the poem. They arrested Prudence Crandall. She spent a night in jail. There was a trial. The well was poisoned. The girls were harassed. And finally, when the neighbors set the house on fire, Prudence Crandall decided to close the school. And I'm going to read some sonnets which are in the voices of the girls at Prudence Crandall's Miss Crandall's School for Young Ladies and Little Misses of Color, 1833, Canterbury, Connecticut. This first one is called The Book. Jolted, insensible, mile upon mile, a thin, high-breasted, slow-eyed yellow girl. Deferential, but wearing the latest style of Paris bonnet, from which one brown curl has broken free and frolics below her jaw. All the stagecoach ride from Philadelphia, she has followed the beckoning finger of destiny toward the place where she'll shoulder the burden of being free. I shall learn, I shall teach. The book in her small gloved hands hasn't seemed a Bible to the inquisitive eyes of her fellow travelers. Almost memorized, it comforts her as she watches the changing lands, a friend to travel with into this chance to bridge for her people the abyss of ignorance. This is called Family. My master father sent me up from South Carolina to Boston as a 9-year-old. My mother's illiterate silence has been a death. I wonder if she still labors in his fields. His sister, dutiful but cold as snow, gave me a little room in her house below the stairs with the Irish servants who hated me for the fatal flaw in my genealogy. For the first time in my life, I am at home in this bevy of scholars, my first family. Here, the wallpapers welcome me into every room, and the mirrors see me, not my pedigree. My sisters, Jeruska, Amelia, Elizabeth, but Mama's unlettered silence is a death. This next one, it's called the Tao of the Trial, and it has, they're not quite quotes because it's a sonnet, they're fixed quotes from the trial of Prudence Crandall. And then there are some invented passages which are intended to sound like the Tao Te Ching about the master, about teachers. Again, it's called the Tao of the Trial. Miss Crandall, you stand accused of knowingly teaching colored persons not resident of the state without prior consent. What is your plea? The teacher does not instruct. The teacher waits. Girl, has anyone been teaching anything to you and your friends? Who taught you how to plead the Fifth Amendment? Your Honor, I submit as evidence of the alleged teaching of alleged students this colored girl here who openly reads books and gazes skyward, who has been overheard conversing animatedly in polysyllabic words and referring offhandedly to the ancient Greeks. The teacher teaches without words and without action, simplicity, patience, and compassion. This is called Miss Anne Eliza Hammond. This is a true story. I've invented Anne Eliza Hammond, but the politics behind it, the history is true. I brought here in a bag between my breasts money from Mama's friend who had bought herself, then saved enough by working without rest to free 4 friends. This woman gave me her wealth of carefully folded dollars so I could take Miss Crandall's course of study. Within a week of my arrival, I was summoned to appear in court. The judge ruled I'd have to pay a fine, depart, or be whipped naked. Honey, the first white fool who thinks he gonna whip me better think again. Touch me and you draw back a nub, white man. I ain't paying and I'm staying. People's dreams brought me to this school. I'm their future in a magic looking glass. That judge and the councilman can kiss my rusty black. This is called Albert Hinckley. Last Sunday, a white boy openly smiled at me where I sat with my sisters at the back of the Baptist church. When the pastor spoke of the sin of slavery, the white boy looked back with his eyebrows arched. I could read his thoughts, but I dared not meet his glance. For nothing must pass between us, not one chance for gossip to pounce with glee on one shared smile. No one must think of us as eligible girls. Waylaid by ruffians as we reached the ford, our wagon was overturned. Our sodden skirts waited and slowed us, but no one was hurt. Splashing to me, his eyes looking truly scared, that boy took my hand. Let me help you, miss. From this day forward, I am an abolitionist. This is called Worth. Today in America, people were bought and sold. 500 for a likely Negro winch. If someone at auction is worth her weight in gold, how much would she be worth by pound, by ounce? If I owned an unimaginable quantity of wealth, could I buy an iota of myself? How would I know which part belonged to me? If I owned part, could I set my part free? It must be worth something, maybe a lot, that my great-grandfather, they say, killed a lion. They say he was black, with muscles as hard as iron, that he wore a necklace of the claws of the lion he'd fought. How much do I hear for his majesty in my blood? I auction myself, and I make the highest bid. The project I've been working on most recently is follows the story of someone who is 100 years earlier than Prudence Crandall, another Connecticut story. This man's name was Venture Smith. His narrative, a dictated narrative, was one of the first books published in the state of Connecticut. It was published in 1780-something. He was born someplace in West Africa in the mid-1730s, was captured as a child, brought to this continent as a slave, was a slave for, I think, 36 years, and then was allowed to work outside of the regular work day so that he could save enough money to purchase his own freedom. After purchasing himself, he purchased his wife, and there, I think, 4 children, and then purchased the freedom of 6 other individuals. He's buried in the town where I live in Connecticut, and he and Prudence Crandall are both considered Connecticut heroes. Prudence Crandall is the official Connecticut state heroine. Venture Smith there's to be a big conference about Venture Smith coming up next fall. He's another hero in our local history. I'm going to read 3 sonnets. Yeah, these are all sonnets too, from Venture Smith's story. Again, this takes place in the middle of the 18th century. I'm going to read a few sonnets which are about a period early in his life when he's captured by black slavers and taken to the shore and put on a ship. And these are a little bit experimental because they're sonnets, but rather than putting the rhymes at the ends of the line, what I'm trying to do in these is to turn the sonnet inside out because of what's being described here, so that the rhyme that occurs at the end of one line is intended to rhyme with a word that occurs at or near the beginning of the following lines, so that they're a little bit weird as sonnets. In this first one, I'm just following his narrative. So the story starts with his boyhood. He's about 8 years old when this happens. It's called Pestilence. 6,000 men strong, the army poured toward the sea. Slavery's wide wings, gliding overhead, spread an infecting shadow as step by step they swept like a battalion of ravenous ants, advancing through the landscape and leaving a stench drenched in sweat, shit, vomit, terror, and smoke. The gentle folk of every village burned, borne by the black tide, shuffled in the slaver's wake, awake for the first time to a larger fate, indeterminate but nasty. On the world stage, in an age when a workforce can be bought and sold. Golden, the flow of human life down the green slopes. Hopes shriveled in the glare of the distant, bright, whitewashed castles' acrid glitter in sunlight. This is called Anamabu. It's taken from his narrative, Anamabu. The black tide fell on the people of Anamabu, who, seeing slaves and slavers, knew what to do. You wait for an opening. The slavers were tired, fired up, still and already on rum. Some of them walked as though they were asleep. Agape, the slaves watched the Anamabuites fight brilliantly against the enemy. With glee, the slaves cheered them toward victory and jubilee. Instead of freeing them, the Anamaboon opportunists captured the slavers. Tied beside people they had captured in their own harsh march, like them, the enslaved slavers wept, swept toward the coast by grinning Anamabu, who would be sold by their neighbors in a month or two. And this is the last one I'll read from this Venture Smith book. It's called A Voyage by Sea. 11 months on the charming Susanna, an ordinary passage, but smallpox amuck in the hold set 60 people free. The sea gulped them down in a boil of grins and fins, men and women tossed like offal to the sharks. Discharge, excretion, diarrhea, spew, oozing, pustular, nausea, vomit, snot. Brought from Africa, they were to be sold to the New World as fuel for the grinding machines of history. Festering, sticky, shit-smeared mucus, pus, pissed on, menstruating, sweaty, stinking. Dazed and erased en route. Before they were renamed by whim, who were those anonymous, generic slaves, graveless as garbage, splashed to the greedy waves? Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to end by reading this wreath for Emmett Till. It's a long poem. It's a heroic crown of sonnets. And let's say a crown of sonnets is a sequence of sonnets in which the last line of each sonnet becomes the first line of the next sonnet, and the first line of the first sonnet becomes the last line of the last sonnet. A heroic crown is a sequence of 15 interlinked sonnets in which the last sonnet is made up of the first lines of the previous 14. And in mine, the last sonnet is also an acrostic, so that the first letters spell out R.I.P. Emmett L. Till. I knew that this was commissioned by a young adult publisher, and so I knew that it was going to be coming into the hands of young people. And I remembered how my mind was blown when I was a young person reading poetry. So I wanted to give them the same experience. I wanted them to get to the end of the poem and just have their minds blown. As Denise said, last year was the 50th anniversary of the lynching of Emmett Till, who was a 14-year-old boy from Chicago. But the poem tells the story, but he was sent to Mississippi to spend some summertime with his mother's family. And while he was there, nobody quite knows what happened. He was accused of whistling at the white woman who was clerking in a general store in a little town called Money, Mississippi. In any case, this woman's husband and several other men came to the house of the Till relatives and pulled him out of bed that night and took him out and killed him. He was shot, beaten. The top of his head was almost severed. One of his eyes was gouged out. He had a weight wired to his neck and was thrown into a river and was not found for several days. And when he was found, his mother insisted that he should have an open coffin funeral. She wanted the world to see how he had been brutalized, and this incident was one of the galvanizing incidents of the early civil rights movement. It was probably as important as Rosa Parks refusing to get up. I'm not sure what else to say about it. There is one allusion which probably everybody here will recognize, but there is an allusion to Paul Celan's Death Fugue, Your Ash your ash hair, Shulamith. I think that may be the only thing that needs to be explained. I'll just read it. It takes about 12 minutes maybe. It's called A Wreath for Emmett Till, and I'm thinking of a wreath of white flowers. Rosemary for remembrance, Shakespeare wrote, a speech for poor Ophelia who went mad when her love killed her father. Flowers had a language then. Rose petals in a note said, I love you. A sheaf of bearded oat said, your music enchants me. Goldenrod, be careful. Weeping willow twigs, I'm sad. What should my wreath for Emmett Till denote? First, heliotrope, for justice shall be done. Daisies and white lilacs for innocence. Then mandrake, horror, wearing a white hood or barefaced, laughing. For grief, more than one, for one is not enough. Rue, yew, cypress, forget-me-nots, though if I could, I would. Forget him not, though if I could, I would forget much of that racial memory. No, I remember, like a haunted tree set off from other trees in the wildwood by one bare bough. If trees could speak, it could describe in words beyond words, make us see the strange fruit that still ghosts its reverie, misty companion of its solitude. Dendrochronology could give its age in centuries by counting annual rings, seasons of drought and rain. But one night, blood spilled at its roots, blighted its foliage. Pith outward, it has been slowly dying, pierced by the screams of a shortened childhood. Pierced by the screams of a shortened childhood, my heartwood has been scarred for 50 years by what I heard with hundreds of green ears, that jackal laughter. 200 years I stood listening to small struggles to find food, to the songs of creature life which disappears and comes again, to the music of the spheres. 200 years of deaths I understood. Then slaughter axed one quiet summer night, shivering the deep silence of the stars. A running boy, 5 men in close pursuit, one dark, 5 pale faces in the moonlight, noise, silence, backslaps, 1 match, 5 cigars. Emmett Till's name still catches in the throat. Emmett Till's name still catches in my throat, like syllables waylaid in a stutterer's mouth. A 14-year-old stutterer in the South to visit relatives and to be taught his family's ways. His mother had finally bought that White Sox cap. She'd made him swear an oath to be careful around white folks. She'd told him the truth of many a Mississippi anecdote. Some white folks have blind souls. In his suitcase, she'd packed dungarees, T-shirts, underwear, and comic books. She'd given him a note for the conductor, waved to his chubby face, wondered if he'd remember to brush his hair. Her only child, a body left to bloat. Your only child, a body thrown to bloat, mother of sorrows, of justice denied. Surely you must have thought of suicide, seeing his gray flesh, chains around his throat. Surely you didn't know you would devote the rest of your changed life to dignified public remembrance of how Emmett died, innocents slaughtered by the hands of hate. If sudden loving light proclaimed you blessed, would you bow your head in humility, your healed heart overflow with gratitude? Would you say yes, like the mother of Christ? Or would you say no to your destiny, mother of a boy martyr, if you could? Mutilated boy martyr, if I could, I'd put you in a parallel universe, give you a better fate. There is none worse. I'd let you live through a happy boyhood, let your gifts bloom into a livelihood on a planet that didn't bear Cain's curse. I'd put you in a nice, safe universe, not like this one. A universe where you'd surpass your mother's dreams. But parallel realities may have terrorists too. Evil multiplies to infinitude, like mirrors facing each other in hell. You were a wormhole history passed through, transformed by the memory of your victimhood. Erase the memory of Emmett's victimhood. Let's write the obituary of a life lived well and wisely, mourned by a loving wife or partner, friends, and a vast multitude. Remember the high purpose he pursued. Remember how he earned a nation's grief. Remember accomplishments beyond belief, honors enough to make us slack-jawed, as if we looked up at a meteor shower or were children watching a fireworks display. Let America remember what he taught, or at least let him die in a World Trade Tower rescuing others. That unforgettable day, that memory of monsters, that bleak thought. The memory of monsters, that bleak thought, should be confined to a horror movie world, a horror classic in which a blind girl hears one by one the windows broken out and acts at the front door. In the onslaught of terror, as a hate-filled body hurls itself against her door, her senses swirl around one prayer: please, God, forget me not. The body snatchers jiggle the doorknob, werewolves and vampires slobber after blood. The circus of nightmares is here. She screams, he screams, neighbors with names he knows, a mob heartless and heedless, answering to no God, tears through the patchwork drapery of our dreams. Tears through the patchwork drapery of dream, for the hanging bodies, the men on flaming pyres, the crowds standing around like devil choirs, the children's eyes lit by the fire's gleams, filled with the delight of licking ice cream, men who hear hog screams as a man expires, watch fob good luck charms, teeth pulled out with pliers. Sinners, I can't believe Christ's death redeems. Your ash hair, Shulamith. Emmett, your eye. Machetes, piles of shoes, bulldozed mass graves, the broken towers, the air filled with last breaths, the blasphemies pronounced to justify the profane, obscene theft of human lives. Let me gather spring flowers for a wreath. Let me gather spring flowers for a wreath, not lilacs from the dooryard, but wildflowers I'd search for in the greening woods for hours of solitude, meditating on death. Let me wander through pathless woods beneath the choirs of small birds trumpeting their powers at the intruder trampling through their bowers, disturbing their peace. I cling to the faith that innocence lives on, that a blind soul can see again, that miracles do exist. In my house there is still something called grace, which melts ice shards of hate and makes hearts whole. I bear armloads of flowers home to twist into a circle, trillium, Queen Anne's lace. Trillium apple blossoms, Queen Anne's lace, woven with oak twigs for sincerity. Thousands of oak trees around this country groaned with the weight of men slain for their race, their murderers acquitted in almost every case. One night 5 black men died on the same tree with toeless feet in this land of the free. This country we love has a Janus face. One mouth speaks with forked tongue, the other reads the Constitution. My country, 'tis of both thy nightmare history and thy grand dream. Thy centuries of good and evil deeds I sing, thy fruited plain, thy undergrowth of mandrake, which flowers white as moonbeams. Indian pipe, bloodroot, white as moonbeams their flowers. Picked, one blackens and one bleeds a thick red sap. Indian pipe, a weed that thrives on rot, is held in disesteem, though it does have its use in nature's scheme, unlike the rose. The bloodroot poppy needs no explanation here. Its red sap pleads the case for its inclusion in the theme of a wreath for the memory of Emmett Till. Though the white poppy means forgetfulness, who could forget when red sap on a wreath recalls the brown boy 5 white monsters killed? Forgetting would call for consciencelessness, like the full moon which smiled calmly on his death. Like the full moon which smiled calmly on his death, like the stars which fluttered their quicksilver wings, like the unbroken song creation sings while humankind tramples the grapes of wrath. Like wildflowers growing beside the path a boy was dragged along, blood spattering their white petals as he, abandoning all hope, gasped his agonizing last breath. Like a nation sending its children off to fight our faceless enemy, immortal fear, the most feared enemy of the human race. Like a plague of not knowing wrong from right, like the consciencelessness of the atmosphere, like a gouged eye watching boots kick a face. Like his gouged eye which watched boots kick his face, we must bear witness to atrocity. But we are whole, we can speak what we see. People may disappear leaving no trace unless we stand before the populace, orators denouncing the slavery to fear. For the lynchers feared the lynchee, what he might do being of another race, a great unknown. They feared because they saw their own inner shadows, their vicious dreams, the farthest horizons of their own thought, their jungles immune to the rule of law. We can speak now or bear unforgettable shame. Rosemary for remembrance, Shakespeare wrote. Rosemary for remembrance, Shakespeare wrote. If I could forget, believe me, I would. Pierced by the screams of a shortened childhood, Emmett Till's name still catches in my throat. Mamie's one child, a body thrown to bloat, mutilated boy martyr. If I could erase the memory of Emmett's victimhood, the memory of monsters, that bleak thought tears through the patchwork drapery of dreams. Let me gather spring flowers for a wreath. Trillium, apple blossoms, Queen Anne's lace, Indian pipe, bloodroot, white as moonbeams, like the full moon which smiled calmly on his death, like his gouged eye which watched boots pick his face. Thank you. Thank you.